Sometimes we think of Vayemo'en as a very personal thing. Every person is presented with nisyonos, with challenges, shmiras ha'einayim, and so it's a personal thing to overcome. But there's a Vayemo'en that Klal Yisrael, as a community, as a tzibur, as the Am Hashem, that they embody also in the way that the Torah HaKadosh teaches us how to live, in the way we conduct our daily lives as a community, as a Klal Yisrael. Let me tell you a story. This happened about 20 years ago or so. And the New York State Education Department had published proposed regulations that could have been problematic for a number of yeshivas. And I was asked by the Rosh Yeshiva, the members of the Moetzes Gedolei HaTorah, to speak to the Commissioner of Education, his name was Richard Mills, and talk to him about this and see whether we could get this regulation either amended or done away with entirely. So I invited Commissioner Mills to come up to my office in downtown Manhattan and have lunch with me. That's the way these things get done. So he came to my office, and we start with some small talk, and I said, Rick, when did you get into town? Because his office was in Albany, he lives in Albany, and he came down to downtown Manhattan. When did you get into town? He said, last night. I said, really? So where do you stay when you come to New York? He says, I stayed in the Brooklyn Marriott, and I saw a very interesting thing. I said, what was that? He says, I came down to the lounge to get a drink, and I looked and I saw that sitting at a table, there was a young man dressed very nicely in a dark suit, and sitting across from him was a young lady, also very nicely dressed, and they were speaking to each other in very serious terms. And I looked around the entire room and I saw there were half a dozen tables where the same thing was taking place. I was beginning to get a little bit nervous, and I said, so Rick, what did you think about that when you saw this? He says, at first I was taken aback. You don't see that very often. Then I thought about it, and I said, that's the way it should be done. If only the rest of society would take courtship so seriously and would also follow this type of conduct, most of the problems that I have to deal with as education commissioner relating to children, they wouldn't exist. This is beautiful. This is the way it should be done. I reminded myself of a pasuk in Parshas Va'eschanan. Ushmartem va'asisem, and you should observe the Torah. Why? Ki hi chachmaschem uvinaschem la'einei ha'amim. This is your wisdom in the eyes of the nations. Asher yishmu and eschachukim ha'ela. They'll hear these things, and if you're like Commissioner Mills, you'll note what's going on. The Amru, and they will say, Rak am chacham v'navayin hagoy hagadol hazeh. This nation is a wise nation. If only the rest of society would be like that. If I was successful that day in getting the regulation amended, it really had very little or nothing to do with the persuasiveness of my legal presentation, none of that. It had to do with the fact that there were half a dozen young men and women who were out on shidduch dates and were talking to each other and going about courtship in a Torah-dical way, which impressed him, which got the commissioner to say, that's the way it should be done. I'm not going to interfere with your system of education. If only we could live up to that today. But that's the Vayemo'en. Klal Yisrael as a whole is saying, we will resist the temptations of modern day society and going about things the way the rest of the world does them. We have a Torah-dical way. We have a way which is very special, and the intelligent people among the nations of the world recognize it as well. We should be so proud to say Vayemo'en as a Klal Yisrael to everything that's going on around us and cling to the ways of HaKadosh Baruch Hu with all their glory and beauty.